I had always loved the quiet life, the kind of solitude that comes with waking up to the gentle lapping of water against a wooden dock, instead of the blaring of car horns or the constant drone of city life. My cabin sat at the edge of Lake Serene, a secluded stretch of water surrounded by pine and oak. I'd built it with my own hands over 3 years, every beam nailed with intention, every window pane installed with care. Quote, it was a symbol of freedom. I didn't have electricity from the grid, nor water piped in. Solar panels powered my modest needs, and a rainwater collection system handled drinking. Life here was simple, deliberate, and mine. But apparently, that simplicity was a problem for HOA Karen. I first met Karen years ago, shortly after buying the plot. She was the president of the Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. Karen had a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and she wielded rules and regulations as weapons. She made it clear that she didn't care for people who lived differently, especially those of us who didn't plug into the conventional lifestyle she and her followers demanded. At first, I tried to be cordial, waving when she drove past in her pristine SUV, nodding at meetings when I attended reluctantly. But the tension was palpable. I was a constant irritant, a reminder that someone could live without her permission, outside her strict little world. The trouble began subtly. I received a letter in the mail, crisp and formal, stamped with the HOA seal. It demanded that I pay what they called annual dues for membership in the Lakeview Heights HOA. I stared at the letter, incredulous. I had never agreed to join the HOA. My land was technically within the subdivision. Yes, but I had purchased it from a private seller with no HOA covenant attached to my deed. I ignored the letter, assuming it was a bureaucratic mistake. The next month, another letter arrived, this one more insistent and slightly threatening, implying legal action if I failed to pay. Karen herself showed up at my cabin a few weeks later, clipboard in hand, with that unnerving smile. She claimed she was there to ensure compliance with HOA regulations. I invited her, impolitely, which she refused, standing instead on my porch like she owned the place. You need to pay your dues, or we'll have no choice but to escalate this, she said. I explained calmly that I had no obligation to pay anything and that my off-grid lifestyle was fully legal. Karen's eyes narrowed, and she left, muttering something about special privileges and not letting this slide. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen was not the kind to let things rest. Over the following months, the letters multiplied. There were increasingly detailed threats, liens, court appearances, and the dreaded promise that they could take possession of your property if I refused to comply. She had apparently done her homework, hiring a lawyer familiar with HOA regulations, hoping to find some loophole that would allow her to squeeze me out. Every time a letter arrived, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Could someone really be so obsessed with enforcing imaginary rules? The tipping point came one autumn morning. I was out on my dock fishing for breakfast when a black SUV drove down my dirt road. It stopped abruptly, and Karen emerged, now accompanied by two men I assumed were hired security. She banged on my door, demanding entry and asserting her authority. I walked down the steps to meet her, holding my fishing rod loosely as if it were a shield. "Karen," I said evenly, "you are trespassing. Leave my property." She laughed, a sharp, high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. "You think you can ignore the HOA forever? We own this neighborhood, and we'll make sure you pay." I had seen her tantrums before, but this time it was escalating. Over the next few weeks, the harassment became relentless. Every week, another letter or email arrived, each one more menacing than the last. Karen had enlisted half the HOA board to keep tabs on me. Reports were filed about my cabin, my solar panels, even my composting toilet. It felt like a full-on campaign of intimidation, yet I refused to back down. My lawyer advised caution and patience. Legally, there was nothing the HOA could do. Their power extended only to members who had voluntarily joined, and I had never signed any agreement. Still, Karen's obsession was unnerving. Then the lawsuit came. The envelope was thick, formal, and stamped with the court's seal. My stomach sank as I read the headline, "Lakeview Heights HOA versus my name, plaintiff claims unpaid dues and property non-compliance." Karen had taken it to court. I knew this battle would be exhausting, but I was determined to defend my life, my cabin, and my freedom. I contacted my lawyer immediately. We started preparing documents, gathering evidence of the property deed, and collecting records of all correspondence with the HOA. Each piece of evidence reinforced the truth. I was an independent property owner, not bound by the HOA's rules. Court day arrived, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. The courtroom was small, filled with an air of suburban self-importance. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, fuming, while I sat with my attorney, feeling oddly calm. When the judge called the case, Karen's lawyer began by reading from a stack of papers, outlining the dues they claimed I owed and alleging known compliance with HOA standards. My lawyer countered, presenting my deed and explaining that there was no legal basis for the claim. Evidence of my off-grid set-up solar panels, water systems, and the absence of HOA membership was presented clearly. Karen tried to interject, but the judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, cut her off. "Miss Karen," she said, her voice sharp, "you cannot impose rules or fees on someone who has not agreed to be bound by your association. The plaintiff has no standing here." I felt a swell of relief, but tried to remain composed. My lawyer summarized our position succinctly, and the judge nodded, reviewing the documentation. Finally, she delivered the verdict. The case was dismissed in my favor, and the HOA was ordered to cease all attempts to collect dues or interfere with my property. The victory was sweet, but the battle left a mark. Karen didn't leave quietly. She continued to glare at me in subsequent neighborhood meetings, but without legal teeth. Her threats lost their potency. I returned to my cabin, the familiar peace washing over me as I stepped onto the dock, sunlight dancing on the lake's surface. I realized that my fight had not just been about property or dues, it had been about autonomy, about defending the right to live life on my own terms. Over the following months, life returned to its quiet rhythm. I installed a few more solar panels, expanded my garden, and even began keeping a journal of my off-grid life, inspired by the ordeal. Karen's letters stopped, and the HOA grudgingly accepted that I was untouchable under their rules. I often laughed to myself when recalling her ridiculous threats, marveling at how much energy she had wasted on one person who simply wanted to live quietly by the lake. Friends began visiting more often, drawn to the stories of my courtroom victory and my self-sufficient lifestyle. I taught them how to fish, how to garden with limited water, and how to harness solar energy efficiently. My cabin, once just a personal refuge, became a symbol of freedom for anyone tired of rules and bureaucracy. People began asking if they could adopt some of my practices in their own homes, and I was happy to share my knowledge. Through it all, I learned the value of standing firm. Karen's relentless pursuit was exhausting, but it reminded me that freedom is never free. It must be claimed and defended. My cabin was more than a building. It was a testament to perseverance, to independence, and to the simple joys that come from living deliberately. Every morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch and watched the sun rise over Lake Serene, I felt an unparalleled sense of satisfaction. I had fought and I had won, not just against Karen, but for the right to live life exactly as I chose. As the seasons changed, the cabin evolved with me. In the winter, I chopped firewood and watched the lake freeze over, a perfect sheet of glass reflecting the pale sun. In the spring, I planted vegetables and herbs, savoring the first sprouts that pushed through the soil. Summer brought friends and laughter. Autumn, a quiet reflection as the leaves turned fiery orange and red. And through it all, I felt a profound gratitude for the life I had built, a life that no amount of HOA interference could touch. Karen of course, continued to fume from afar, but I rarely thought about her anymore. Her obsession was a stark contrast to the peace and contentment I had nurtured for myself. I often marveled at the irony. Someone could be so consumed with power over others while I lived entirely free. And that, more than anything, was the ultimate victory. By the time the 5th anniversary of my cabin's completion came around, I had fully embraced my off-grid lifestyle. I had rainwater systems, solar energy, a thriving garden, and even a small library tucked into a corner of the cabin. My life was richer, simpler, and more fulfilling than I could have imagined. The HOA had tried to enforce control through intimidation and lawsuits, but in the end, it was my commitment to independence that prevailed. Living off-grid had always been a dream, but Karen's relentless pursuit had transformed it into a declaration. Every panel I installed, every meal I harvested, and every quiet evening spent on my dock was a statement. Autonomy matters, and no one can take it from you if you defend it. The lake shimmered in the sunlight, birds chirped in the trees, and I finally felt completely, unequivocally free.